Now, it's just 19 days into the new government, and economists have warned that Labour's inflation-busting public sector pay proposals could cost an eye-watering £10 billion every year. We're scrapping the two-child limit, an extra £2.4 billion on top of that per year. All of this adds up to an extra spending of an eye-watering £70 billion over the Parliament, and that's just two policies. So today's big question is, are bumper tax hikes inevitable? Are they on the way? And could Starmonomics cost you a packet? Well, let's discuss this further with the head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance, who joins me in the studio, Elliot Keck. Elliot, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, as sure as night has followed day, people said, well, there'll be big public sector spending booms. That seems to be in the pipeline. And we either pay with that, with printing money. We can't do that with £2.7 trillion in debt. The magic money tree no longer exists. So the only way, surely, is tax rises.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, listen, during the election and for many months before, Rachel Reeves, and I think rightly, absolutely pledged ironclad fiscal discipline when she came into government. Unfortunately, and only a couple of weeks in, we're starting to see that discipline just starting to fray. And the figures we're talking about are mind-boggling. And the ultimate reality is we know that they'll have to raise tax in order to pay them unless they increase borrowing, which I don't think is feasible and would also go against their fiscal discipline pledge. And the only way to fund that through tax is going to be through the things like VAT, national insurance and income tax. Stuff like VAT on private schools is not going to pay for these pledges. And the numbers involved are eye-watering. To pay for all of that alone would be the equivalent of like 3p on income tax. Now, they're not likely to do that. They're most likely to chase people who already have money. A lot of talk about capital gains, about inheritance tax. Do you think we're going to see that kind of tax movement? It's going to be a difficult statement in autumn for Rachel Reeves. I think we may see movement on some of those taxes, but actually they're not going to raise the revenue. They're simply not going to raise the revenue. The Treasury's own estimates say that if you increase capital gains tax, it's unlikely to bring in extra revenue. In fact, many estimates that the Treasury put forward, and Rachel Reeves talks a lot about the sanctity of the OBR. A lot of these estimates say if you raise capital gains tax, you actually lose revenue. The only way you're going to bring in that sort of £70 billion over 5 years is if you do something like national insurance, income tax or VAT. And I do wonder if they may look at national insurance, which of course the last government cut by 4p, and say, well, we're going to restore that to what it was before. That would be what I would be looking out for. And
meanwhile, we're hearing Project Fear type messaging, a statement yesterday. We're in the worst situation since World War II. It feels like we're getting fluffed up. We're getting softened up for some pain.
Yeah, I mean, listen, clearly the economic situation is not a good one. Debt is at £2.7 trillion. It's over 100% GDP. We can debate about whether it's the worst since World War II. Certainly the tax burden is heading to the highest since World War II. But listen, either way, we knew things were bad before the election. The Labour Party knew things were bad before the election. This whole, now we've looked under the bonnet, things are worse than we thought. I don't think that is sustainable. But nevertheless, things are bad. And ultimately, if they're going to increase spending in the way that many of their backbenchers are demanding, we just saw, UNRWA funding increase by £21 million in the last couple of weeks. They're going to have to start rising taxes.
They talk about growing their way out of it. We don't really seem to get a lot of detail. Elliot, what about things like actually cutting tax on corporation tax to make Britain more productive, more attractable, more worthy of inward investment from abroad?
Well, we know that cuts to corporation tax do wonders for growth. There's a good reason for that. Corporation tax is paid by employees through lower wages. It's paid by consumers through higher prices, and it's paid by shareholders through lower dividends. So we know that cutting corporation tax would be an excellent way to boost growth. Unfortunately, that's not in the Labour Party's ideology. It's not in their way of thinking. They view business as not something to be celebrated to quite the same extent as others. And so, unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen. But what I'd be saying to this current government is definitely don't make things worse. And that means they're going to have to stand up to some of those pay demands.
And you talked about capital gains tax. It doesn't net the revenue. Quite simply, if we learn anything from the bad old days of the 1970s, if you squeeze the pips, people flee the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, the only places where you can really reliably raise a lot of revenue is income tax on ordinary working people, national insurance on ordinary working people, and VAT, the sort of taxes that people actually cannot avoid, cannot find ways around, and taxes on people that don't have the ability to simply leave the country. And unfortunately, I think that's what we're heading to.
OK, thank you very much for joining us. And that's Elliot Keck, who's the head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to have you in the studio.